So I'm from Innovate UK, which essentially is the UK's innovation agency. We're funded through central government to encourage innovation across all sectors and boost GDP growth, essentially. In the energy space, we've obviously got an incentive to decarbonise at the same time. So I'm not really going to speak to you about smart meters very much. I'm going to talk about some of the things that they enable. But I worked on the smart metering program. I'm very familiar with it. And one of the things I wanted to start by saying is the cost-benefit analysis for the smart metering program was built on, I think it's 3% saving in electricity and about 2% savings in gas. And what that's done is on a budgeting basis. It's if I can see what I'm consuming, I'm going to take some action to try and consume less because I see how much I'm spending. I think what's been illustrated today is that there's all sorts of other benefits on top of that we're seeing. I think anybody who's engaged in the program understands that that's kind of the minimal viable benefit. And we're now getting to the point where we have to put to bed all the cynicism about the program and prove that some of these things are actually going to produce huge benefits to the energy system. We've got some projects, for instance, one of them is looking at the efficiency performance of heat networks using metering. Another one's using peer-to-peer trading based on smart meter. Another one is looking at improving climate change models by integrating smart meter data. So there's all these things on top of what's been mentioned today. But I'm going to speak about a few programs that we've got, starting with one called Prospering from the Energy Revolution, which is looking at taking a whole systems approach to energy management. That's across heat, power, and transport, as well as storage, distribution, etc., to try and integrate and manage those decisions like, do we store energy in a battery? Do we push it to heat pumps when we've got excess supply? And all those kinds of decisions that act across consumers. So this is the structure of the program. To go into a little bit more detail, what we're talking about is something on the scale of a medium-sized town, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a medium-sized town. It could be an energy-intensive cluster using a similar kind of consumption as a small town. It could be a rural area which is massively dispersed. One of the things we're focusing on is trying to get a range of archetypes so that we can scale these projects across the UK. So the practical demonstrators, we ran a competition for last year. So that's looking, it has to integrate heat, power, and transport. And by these things, I mean produce a decision-making layer which incentivizes people to introduce new technologies, for example, electric vehicles or for heat networks. When do we decide that a vector change from electricity to produce hydrogen, for instance? And how do we know that the decisions that we're making are the best use of our money as well? But most importantly, we're not talking about technology implementation. We're talking about the market structure which goes on top of that. So Phil and Josh illustrated it for electricity in their presentations, that once you look at price incentives, then people's behavior and the technology choices that they make fall out of the bottom of that. And we're trying to do that on another level up. So between industry and domestic consumers, small building owners, how is there a market structure built over that which collectively enables them to make decisions which decarbonize, lower bills, reduce pollution, etc. The second part of the competition, the practical demonstrators, we're going to announce around 4 city-scale demonstrators in the next couple of months, which was successful in that competition last year. The future designs is a recognition that for some of these things, we're going to need fundamental changes to our regulation and policy. So what we want to do is give people a blank workbook to really understand the locality that they're working on. This is all very data-centric and driven through information. which is where you see the relevance of smart metering. And how do you really take a blank workbook and say, okay, in the mid-2020s, if we were going to implement this and having the financial model and market structures to do so, how would we do it? So last year we ran a small competition of 1.5 million to prime people's thoughts in this area. And later on in this year, we're going to run a much bigger competition looking at detailed designs. I'm going to come back onto that in more detail in a moment. The innovation development component is where we think there's gaps in the energy systems ecosystem which need plug-in, more like our traditional funding models, which might fund a widget or a bit of technology development. Underneath all this, we've got a research consortium of academics who are receiving, there's 21 universities involved, and they're receiving about £8 million to do fundamental research into the energy system. And then we've got the energy systems catapult, who will do an evaluation role across all the projects so that we know if this project is showing huge benefits in decarbonisation. How do we know that it's from the heat component or the transport component? Is it because the individuals in their locality respond differently than they would elsewhere in the UK, etc.? The timeline of the programme activities. We kicked off the concepts and designs, which are those smaller projects I mentioned, over the last month or so. The demonstrator projects will be kicking off and announced shortly. They're in the scale of between 25 to 40 million in funding, joint funding across the both of them. The detailed designs projects we're anticipating will be kicking off early next year. And over the next kind of 6 months or so, we're going to be looking at running the competition, the application process assessment in the run up to that. The other two components, the research consortium and the integration service, are already kicked off and will run for the duration of the programme until 2022. So what are we looking for? Strapline is that we're looking for world-leading smart energy systems designs which focus on one specific UK location. They've got to encompass new business models and market structures which can test new regulatory and policy arrangements. And they've got to intelligently link supply, distribution, storage, and demand power patterns across power, heating, and transport. And ideally doing that intradaily and interseasonally as well. A quick overview of the competition. We intend to make available up to 30 million to fund the detailed designs. The planning at the moment is that it'll open in summer, maybe around July time. Each project will have a duration of 24 months, starting in early 2022 and finishing in starting in early 2020, and finishing in early 2022. We're going to fund around 10 projects, so simple maths, we're looking at around up to 3 million grant funding per project. There will be an expectancy that there'll be an aspiration at least to match funding from industry. And just to mention that these projects typically have quite a diverse consortia, the likes of a handful of technology SMEs, some larger engineering type firms, academics, distribution networks, local authorities, etc., because there's quite a lot of components that need to be pulled together to deliver these. It's open to all eligible applicants. Eligible because there's kind of financial checks that are made on your company. You have to be a UK registered company, etc. And we're going to be running full briefing and brokering events across the country, probably in early May. As part of the programme as well, we're organising some international collaboration to try and look at where we can export our skills and expertise. The programme isn't just about the decarbonisation agenda, it's about strengthening the UK economy. And one of the ways we're doing that is in March, between the 17th and 22nd, we're taking a cohort of companies to the US, to one of their biggest energy conferences. We're going to organise meetings with the US government and the likes of academia over there, such as MIT and Harvard, etc. It's going to be funded, so all your flights, hotel, conference attendance, all that will be paid for. And we're taking applications for that right now, but it does close on Sunday. So if you're interested, get on it quickly. It's not a full Innovate UK application if you have done one before. It's more like a questionnaire, so it doesn't take very long. I'd encourage you to have a look. Transforming Construction is another programme through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Funds, like Prospering from the Energy Revolution, but really looking at changing how we manufacture buildings, how we introduce digital design methods, how we make our buildings energy positive in future. But that's an important part of it. Energy is a core bit of this programme. It's a £170 million programme, which has been running since last year. I'm not delivering this one, and it's part of the reason I'm going to ask Jill to come up, because the Active Building Centre, which has been £36 million of funding, was awarded at the end of last year to Specific in Swansea, so I'm going to hand over to Jill to tell you a little bit more about that. There you go.
Okay, so just to be clear, I'm not in charge of the 170 million and I'm not running it. Okay. So, what an opportunity. So 30 years ago, almost today, I stood in the old Adelphi building at Salford and started on a HND in business and finance with marketing. Little did I know, 30 years later, I'd be stood in the new Adelphi building at Salford University, talking about the energy revolution. And yet my thesis back then was about, do companies have a regard for the environment, or is it marketing hype? So, I'm thrilled to be here because energy efficiency has been at the heart of everything I've done for the last 30 years. So, how many of you in the room have got an iPad? Okay. And how many of you in the room live in a house or a flat or, live in a house, building? And how many of you switched energy supplier? Okay, so quite a few of you. That's good. So 10 years ago, we didn't have an iPad. If you can't show people what you try to win, they don't know what they want. So it's all about innovation and the role of disruptive technologies. So my background is construction. I've worked in the construction industry for the last, 30 years now. Basically started out life on the Manchester Arena, building the Manchester Arena. And through that worked across the construction industry, marketing, product management, energy efficiency, just the whole fabric of a building, everything that goes in a building, system approach, everything. London Olympics, sustainable construction, how we deliver sustainable games. So over the last 10 years, I've really focused on energy efficiency in buildings and why when we can build buildings that are energy efficient and use innovation to build them, why aren't we building energy efficient buildings? So the chap earlier said that, we've got some great models that model the energy performance of a building. Well, actually, that model called SAP doesn't really give you what it's supposed to give you. The energy performance certificate, 10 years built a house at Nottingham University. Fabric first approach, totally beyond Part L back then, energy performance in the building. The SAP rating was something like an E because the computer model said no. So as a construction industry, we've been innovating for years, but we've not necessarily put it all together. And I'm pleased to say that, flash forward 10 years, we can do so much more with our buildings because technology has come down, the costs have come down, and now we're in this fifth energy revolution. And this is why the construction sector deal has been so important about transforming construction. So for the last few years, I've been working at something called Specific, which has been looking to turn buildings into active buildings. So what is an active building, you ask? So basically, if you can integrate technologies such as PV generation to generate, you then have storage, so a battery, and your building is already energy efficient, you don't need to use as much energy to heat your home. So an active building doesn't actually use gas. So if you don't need to use gas in your building, why do we as consumers need to pay to upgrade the gas system for the next 30 odd years? Well, you can't actually model that at the moment within our future energy scenarios. So an active building is looking to generate, store and release energy and power, and also integrate with the grid, charge electric vehicles, and give you a completely different value proposition. So the active building is going to bring together all the fabulous learning from across industry, so what's happening in the energy space, the smart data world, the construction world, and put it all together to show, well, actually, if you bring all those system parts together into one building, you can create an active building. So what we did a few years ago, we created what was lacking in the industry, which is demand for energy-efficient homes. We know that you can build energy-efficient homes, but there's no business value proposition there, because over here is the energy market, and over here is the construction industry. So if you build a house, you are charged construction costs. If you want to then connect that construction building to the energy, over here, you have to pay all the energy costs. So you can't actually unlock the value of this building. So these homes look like normal homes. They're in Neath. Now, these aren't normal homes. These homes at Neath don't need gas. That means the people that are going to move into them won't be living in fuel poverty. And also, there's different ways to trade that energy and what you do with it. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the current market, the energy market, the construction sector can't tap in to those resources. And yet the construction industry, believe it or not, does innovate and has been innovating, but it just can't tap in to the world of the energy world. So the pointer doesn't work. Oh. So the roof has got an integrated PV system that generates electricity. And the wall has got what's called a transpired solar collector that's going to generate heat. We're also going to have some Tesla batteries on there to store that. And basically, that becomes an active building. But what the new Industrial Challenge Fund has done, it's actually given some funding to what's called the Active Building Centre, which is a big consortium of all the finest brains in the world, essentially, that are all coming together. So from all the universities, so we're working with UCL, Imperial, Newcastle, the list goes on, to actually say, we have all this data, but we can't actually model it in those future energy scenarios and determine what the value of the whole of the built environment would look like if you dropped it into the energy world. Because essentially, like I said at the beginning, there's a huge opportunity that we all face, and it's a new world of smart technologies and engineering all brought together because the costs of technologies have come down so much. There's a different value proposition for the consumer. And what the Active Building Centre will do, so this building here is going to become the new living lab facility, whereas it'll test new integrated technology solutions to bring them all together to prove that concept, but at scale, to actually give the real empirical data and evidence back into government to inform those policy decisions. So for the last 2 years, my role has been about policy and engagement with government, but I've spent probably a lot of time with Ofgem and to try and influence why we don't have a fair competitive market landscape over here in energy costs. The reason is we don't have the data to change that. We need to do that. And that's what this new Industrial Challenge Fund will do for the construction sector. It will allow the Active Building Centre to look at how you integrate all the best technologies together, make sure it works and fits for purpose at scale, and then link it into what's called the Construction Innovation Hub over here, which is looking at off-site construction, modular design, and how all that works. And really put the UK at the forefront of construction, because it always has been, but we just don't sing loud enough about it. So, like I say, you can win a lot if you show people what you want. And that's what we're trying to do at the Active Building Centre. When I'm going backwards. So keep in touch, follow us on Twitter. Literally, we're in our 100-day plan, so we've only just officially got the funding. And I'm still on my old email at Swansea, but moving over to the Active Building Centre. And we've got an industry partners event sometime in March. So watch our website and Twitter account to find out more details.
Thanks, Jill. I asked Jill to do that just at lunchtime, so she's done really well to put it together so quickly. I'm going to quickly rattle through one more thing I've got. I did want to mention on the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Challenge, I ran a webinar a week ago. There's a recording of that up, and it's in the slides, so do take a look at that because it gives a lot more detail. It's about half an hour long. And there's a link in the slides to the application for the Boston trip as well. Final thing I want to talk to you about is this program that we've put together with the Knowledge Transfer Network, which we're a parent organisation of. And essentially, we're looking at energy systems, technical challenges, and a process by which large corporates and OEMs can communicate their challenges to small SMEs and get tech transfer from different industries, etc. So we've previously run these with offshore wind, and we're now doing a nuclear one, which we've seen really great results. We've had 4 or 5 companies sign major deals with, so you can imagine the kind of large corporates that work in those sectors. And now we're doing the same for energy systems. So we've got our first one from ENGIE, which is looking at reducing substation noise and visual pollution. And we're now building in other ones. This is the process for it. We've demonstrated it works really well. We're now looking for applicants for that first challenge, but we're also looking for challenge owners. So if there's any people from large organisations who've been struggling with a problem, come and speak to me, and we'll try and get that in. That's all from me. Thank you.